in that area. We're just going to focus on, hey, what do you do with your money now that you're in this situation? You can't change it. This is the situation. What do you do? What do you focus on? So realize everything that we're going to talk about in the winners category has already had some type of run. And so the execution of when and how to reposition a portfolio into these winners is really where the key is. And I'm not going to talk about the execution because that's what you got to talk to us about, because that's the extra sauce. But here's the meat of what you need to know, which is in the winners category, what Justin and I did is we said, let's do this. There's certain areas that are going to be fairly obvious to investors. When you read an article, everybody's going to be talking about it. So Justin, I mean, everything that, all the research, what did you always hear? Alternative energy?
Yep. So you're
cannabis,
looking at,
yep. Tax strategies, because taxes are going to go up. So those are probably, we're probably, everybody listening to this is probably not hearing anything new by us saying, hey, alternative energy, ESG, which is the environment, sustainability, and governance. It's basically, think about technology around the environment. Cannabis, because legalization seems to be a much smoother path under the Democrats. And you know who the most important person is in cannabis now?
who?
Kamala Harris. She's the tiebreaker vote, right? And she's from California. So that's really what has cannabis so excited as far as in the public markets, is now the path seems like there's such, it just barriers have seemed to have dropped is what the opinion is. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. We will see if that really happens. But the most important thing for the cannabis sector is really banking. So we'll see if that really happens. So we wanted to move beyond the fairly obvious and talk about the stuff that is not necessarily so obvious. But here's the thing, is there's going to be a stimulus play, and we've already been seeing it. And we've been seeing this stimulus play because the thought process is that with the Democrats running the show, they're going to be freer with the checkbook, that they're going to pump more money into the economy. So that pushes the recovery names like Justin and I already talked about. That's, you know, think about airlines, think about cruise lines, think about anything that really got taken out to the woodshed and got punished. That's the area that I would think a lot of people are going to go value hunting for, if there's any value left. Infrastructure becomes part of that play, because the idea there is, in order to really stimulate the economy longer term, we've got to get the generation millennials really working and making money. Infrastructure is a great way to do that. And along with that, could push commodities, gold, silver, iron ore, things of that nature. So that's what we would call the stimulus play. That was probably already in play. However, maybe now it's just more enhanced under the blue wave. So there's also these secular things that have been happening in markets. So in these secular things are trends that are going over very long periods of time. And these things were happening already, but here we think that they get a little more elevated, right, Justin?
That's right.
Yeah, so in this area, you've got things like ag tech. So Justin, you know, in the world of ag tech, why do you think that's such an important factor in the world today when it comes to ag tech?
Well, it's makes up 70+% of our body, and that would be water. Water is a big problem, and we tend to use a lot of it or waste a lot of it, and we don't have a way to continue to keep filling the mouths of everybody who wants to keep wasting water. So, you know, I think there's going to become some efficiencies there that they need to work on.
Exactly. The population growth is now at a point that water cannot sustain what we need for ag. So you're going to see a lot of ag tech over the next 10 years, especially really more localized small farming. Fintech, same thing. You're seeing the large financial institutions kind of really break down and go really, really tech. I mean, there's a lot of fintech, from everything from cryptocurrencies all over into all the new apps. And you're going to see all these things really get tied together. And that's a trend that's already been happening. What we call conservation tech. This would really fall also into the ESG sector, which is essentially any technology that enhances the environment and enhances conservation. And then we also threw in here medical device and supply, because now with, you know, post-COVID, there's a lot more attention on both, just not just PPE, but just, medical device supply. So we think those are things that were already in motion, but under this particular administration, we could see them maybe get a little higher octane. Maybe some fuel gets thrown on the fire. All right, so here's the not so obvious things, and this is where I really always like to think about, what's the things that people aren't thinking about, and as sad as it is to say, gun and ammo manufacturers are one of those areas that now you have to consider, because Justin, what administration did we see the largest amount of gun sales in history?
Mr. Obama.
Yeah, so the 8 years under Obama, and this happens under the Democrats, and it's just because everybody starts to get worried that they're going to go after your guns, that they're going to go at, and the laws are going to change, and I think there's a lot of hype around those things, but nonetheless, you're going to see the response here, and I think we've already seen that, especially after last week's turmoil. One of the things that's not so obvious, I think, also, Justin, is health insurance. Everybody's worried about, okay, how does healthcare change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then, health insurance companies now, maybe they start to become in the driver's seat, because now they're going to have a lot of control and influence on pricing. So somebody's going to get squeezed, right? So wherever the health insurance benefits, there's going to be somebody in the medical profession that gets squeezed, and it's probably pharmaceuticals. Would you agree, or do you?
I totally agree, because they've already they made their money, they made their pop.
Yeah.
It's all in the charts.
Do you think? I mean, is there anything here that you think that we may have missed, or?
I think on this particular side, maybe the natural gas is an area, but that's kind of under the, we got into that under the stimulus. Well, that wouldn't be the stimulus, but the fairly obvious.
You bring up a good point, and for everybody watching is, I mean, if you want to play the electrification of things in life, everybody has to plug these things into something, and electricity is made with coal and natural gas, and nobody likes coal. So I'm going to have to assume that the future for producing electricity becomes really natural gas until those alternatives become more online, right? Because you can't get enough out of solar and wind and other sources at this particular moment. Maybe in 20 years, right? So I do think you're onto something, because I do think that natural gas becomes one of those things that people would be afraid of under the Biden administration, because he doesn't like fracking. However, I do think people have to remember Pennsylvania was a hell of a battle. It was a bloodshed in this particular election. He may be a little more sensitive to those Pennsylvania people over the next 2 years, going into the, making sure they keep control when they go into the primaries. So I think you bring a good point with natural gas. If there was a old school commodity, if there was a fossil fuel commodity that I would think could surprise people, it would be natural gas. So
agreed.
All right. So let's talk about the losers.